please tell people your credentials, what your background is.
Sure. So, my name is Ryan Graves. I have an engineering degree, mechanical and aerospace engineering. I promptly left doing that to go fly F-18s for the Navy as soon as I graduated college. Did that for about a decade, both operationally in combat as well as in an instructor role, teaching the new students. And we did witness something while we were flying in our jets, but we were doing it we witnessed it in the context of our just everyday flying and our missions.
And what year was it that you witnessed this?
So we started seeing these in 2014 was the earliest that I know. 2013, late 2013, early 2014.
And could you describe what was the very first experience?
Yeah, so for me personally, the experience was simply just flying out to the area like I would any other day. And instead of seeing an empty airspace with just my wing person or another squadron doing something a different block, there were all of a sudden a lot of different radar contacts, which is immediately a problem because, we could be hitting one of those or someone working in our area. And this was happening because we upgraded our radar the best we could tell. We were in a earlier radar called the APG-73, and we had come back from deployment. We entered a maintenance phase, it's called. We kind of do a little bit less flying, upgrade the jets if we need to, do any long-lasting maintenance, and we upgraded to the APG-79, which was a much better radar.
And what is the difference in the capabilities of the upgraded radar system versus the original system?
Mm-hmm. So, kind of practically speaking, it's like going from an analog TV essentially to like an OLED. It's, a digital modern tool compared to more of like an analog classical radar that has more limited range and has less ability to track multiple targets and things of that nature. So just generally speaking, we would expect to see, more objects if there were any out there or smaller objects, but there shouldn't have been any objects out there.
And so how far offshore are you when this is all going down?
Our working areas start about 10 miles off the coast, and then it goes out 100 or 250 miles or so, though we don't usually use those far eastern areas. But we would only see them over the water. So they would really only be in our working areas, maybe slightly in between the working area and land, but never over the land, sometimes over the bays that are in the area that are quite large. But never just kind of zooming west over land or anything like that.
And is this restricted airspace?
It's not. So that's a tricky question. For us operating in a military operating area, it is not restricted in the sense that you have to be there's only one person allowed in there. You could have these little Cessnas kind of bumbling in there, but they would get called out pretty quick, both from the kind of air traffic control agency that's working out there, as well as the F-18s and the other aircraft that may be working out there. But in a broader sense, when we look at it in relation to our air defense identification zone, which is essentially a band of airspace that surrounds our entire country, if your flight path originates out over the water outside of that ADIZ and you proceed into that ADIZ, into our controlled airspace, then you do have to essentially have permission to enter that airspace. It's not a restricted airspace like a traditional bombing range, but it is protected airspace. It's our coastal air.
So you have this upgraded radar system, and what are you detecting?
So on the radar, really what we can learn from that is essentially the kinematics of the object. So where is it essentially, and what direction is it going, how fast is it going, things of that nature. We can't necessarily make out the shape or things of that nature. So it's a representation. It's like a block on our screen to show that information. And so when we see that on our radar, we can tell, where it's located, perhaps what's located around it if there's other objects we're detecting, how fast it's going, what direction it's pointed in, what direction it's traveling in. So we call that velocity vector. So if we see this essentially little circle, it'll have a tail coming off of it. And that tail kind of represents the nose of the vehicle, at least as its flight path is going. And so with that, we would typically see an aircraft just kind of trudging along with a straight line, taking occasional turns. But these objects had a little bit more of a, I don't want to say random, but more less controlled flight path. That velocity vector would kind of jump around a bit more. They would not proceed in like a perfectly straight line as you would imagine like a flight navigation computer would take you, right? It takes you from A to B in the straightest line possible. These objects seem to kind of be moving in a direction that was not a straight line, but generally proceeding in that direction. And so they would kind of be meandering slightly, but moving in that general direction, both three-dimensionally and horizontally.
So
they'd be
winding around, going up, going down.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not on a flat plane, and they're not going in a straight line.
So I don't want to draw too many firm statements like that because we would see them being flat too. We'd see them perfectly stationary up there, regardless of the wind.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Wow. So what kind of wind are you talking about?
Oh, gosh. I mean, at altitude, you can have anywhere up to 100, 120 knots of airspeed.
What is that in miles per hour?
It's about 100, 130, 140 miles an hour.
So they're completely stationary with 140 mile an hour wind.
Correct.
How would something do that?
It's confusing to me as well. Even if we had something that could just burn that much energy, right? Like if you had a sphere surrounded by little rockets, right? Just imagining something right now.
Okay.
And if you wanted to keep that perfectly stationary, right, against gravity, you could just fire all the rockets at the bottom really fast and hopefully keep it flat, right?
Right.
It's going to have tiny little variations. And then if you have wind hitting it and all this, you could potentially have those rockets try to counter it, but it would never be perfectly still in winds like that.
Because the wind's not perfectly still either, right?
Exactly.
It changes and varies.
It does. So it's almost like it's the wind. It's not even really fighting the wind, it seems. You know, it just seems like it's just there in a way.
Wow. So the first time you see these things, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, the first time really was, well, what is this, right? It's not a UFO or something mysterious at this point. It's at what we're thinking at this point we see on the radar is just, well, our radar is broken, right? These perhaps don't represent physical objects yet because we hadn't, visually seen these or seen them on our camera yet. And so, we kind of like, hey, what's going on here? Is anyone else seeing this kind of thing? But not really like investigating it, right? It's just kind of like, all right, there was stuff out there, but maybe next time we'll take a look. But the way our systems work, when we have all these contacts on our radar, and if we kind of just select one out with our little cursor there, all our sensors go to it. Our FLIR goes to it, which is our camera system. All our weapons, they have like their own little eyes in some sense, and they all look in that direction. And so eventually, someone had one of these selected and flew close enough so that as they look at their FLIR system, their camera, they could see something that was at the spot represented on the radar, right? So there was something there.
So they were seeing it visually with their own eyes?
Not at this point, just on the FLIR system.
The FLIR system.
And so it's a regular camera and also an infrared camera. And so typically we'll roll around in infrared just because it returns a better image typically. So yeah, it didn't look like an object they were seeing on the FLIR. It just looked like a source of IR energy in a sense, almost as if someone was shining a flashlight. But something had to be there to be reflecting that energy or creating it. So at this point, to answer your question, now we're like, okay, this isn't just an error in our radar. This is perhaps, we're thinking this is real. We have to really respect this as like a safety hazard now. Even if it's just a small, however small ribbon of tinfoil, right? Like that suck down the engine can still take out an aircraft, right? So we have to be very respectful of that.
Like a Mylar balloon type thing?
Potentially, right? Yeah.
But how fast are these things going?
So sometimes stationary, right? Sometimes they would be going around 0.6 to 0.8 Mach, which is at altitude about, 240 to maybe 330 knots, around there.
So somewhere in the range of an airplane.
Yeah, a fighter aircraft would be kind of flying around at those airspeeds, except sometimes they would be perfectly stationary as well.
Right. So it's not exhibiting any sort of patterns that you've recognized in the past.
No, they have actually. So although
with the stationary, no, right?
Correct. With the stationary, no. With the meandering kind of flight path, no. But I would also see them essentially fly what we call a racetrack pattern. And essentially what that means is they fly in a straight path, and then they do like a 180-degree turn in a certain direction. Then they fly a straight path, then turn again. So that's what we call a racetrack pattern as opposed to a circular holding pattern. We did witness racetrack patterns. In fact, I think there's been some cases off the West Coast just the past couple of weeks where people have also been observing objects flying in racetrack patterns high at altitude with lights. So I do recognize that behavior, but I don't necessarily think that means we have to attribute it to normal behavior necessarily. That type of flight path is important because it's a very efficient way to fly, right? If you have to maintain the position in a certain area, you want to minimize how much you're turning. Because anytime you're turning in an aircraft, you're using more energy than if you were just flying straight and level. And so by having that racetrack pattern, it's an efficient way of holding in a position by maximizing straight and level time and minimizing your turn time.
And how long would these things stay up there for?
So from our experience, and again, we weren't studying these, but they were always out there. They were
Always.
out there when we took off, we'd see them, and then we go to land, they would still be out there.
Like every day?
Every day.
Every day?
Every day.
So you guys go from not having any idea that these things are out there to an upgraded radar system to seeing them every day.
Yep.
What is the thought? Like, how are you feeling when these, like, is there an evolution of the thought pattern of how you're addressing these things and thinking about them? Initially, you're thinking they're errors. When do you start getting a thought that, like, what the fuck is this thing?
Yeah. So that happened when we visually saw one. And the first time we visually saw one, the object was directly at what we call the entry point of the area. So, that box that I told you about in the sky that starts 10 miles off the coast, there's a particular GPS, location and altitude where incoming traffic will fly in and outbound traffic will fly in the exact same spot, but will fly out 1,000 feet lower. There were 2 aircraft from my squadron, VFA 11, and they flew, took off as a flight of 2. That means they're essentially flying in a formation like this. And as they hit the area, one of these objects went right between the aircraft. The lead air crew saw the object. The Dash 2 aircraft crew did not, which is not surprising because they're usually, you're very focused on flying formation. You're just staring right at that aircraft. The lead really has actual leeway to look around. So he saw it, and, he immediately came back. I have to assume he didn't have it on his radar because he wouldn't have flown through this object at the entrance point. He turned around, flew back, landed, and I was in the ready room when he come back, and he had all his gear on, which typically is not a good thing because you want to get that stuff off as fast as possible. So usually means there's a problem of some nature, and he was just sitting there saying, "Hey, I almost hit one of those damn things." And we all knew what he was referring to, even though we didn't necessarily have a name for it, just because we were seeing these so much. And he described it. He described it just as a black or dark gray cube, and that cube was inside of a clear or translucent sphere. And essentially, the apex or the corners of that cube, best he could tell, were touching that inside of that sphere.
And that description mirrors many of the descriptions that people have had of these, whatever you want to call them. Whether they're calling them UAPs now for some strange reason. UFOs is I don't know. Does it have a dirty connotation to it? And is it tainted because of so many crazy people talk about UFOs? Is that what it is?
It does come with a lot of assumptions baked in.
It baked in. So that's something. But whatever it is, that is a design that people have reported seeing before. That this translucent sphere and this cube. Can you see through the cube?
Not to my understanding, no.
So it's some sort of solid black cube that's inside this translucent sphere.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just floating around and flying around the sky.
So, that's a good point. Is it floating around? Is it flying around? It's doing both, which is strange, right? Because you could think of that description and go, okay, that's kind of some kind of weird balloon maybe with stuff in it. And that's certainly, one way. If you just view that angle of it, then it seems explainable. But when that, the balloon-like object starts cruising around at, 0.8 Mach, that nullifies that particular idea. And you'll see that a lot where it's not just like that one picture or that one behavior. It's really, you kind of have to zoom out a bit and look at everything in relation to each other and say, okay, why is this weird? Okay, it was hanging out in a racetrack pattern. That's not exotic. But when you learn it was doing it for, perhaps 13 hours.
13 hours?
Perhaps they were out there all the time, So, I land and I go back. And we weren't on a intel mission to analyze these, right? We're going to do our training. It's very expensive, $30K an hour to fly these things, right? So Really, the only time we can put energy into looking at these things is when we're kind of transiting back and forth or waiting for a fight to start. And so, it's never like a dedicated analysis.
We talked a lot of nonsense about aliens, but we also talked about the technology that he knows is state of the art when it comes to drones.
Yes.
And that some of these ones in New Jersey, they're doing things that you can't really do yet.
Yes.
Yeah, which is really fascinating. Because
Yes.
it's like, okay.
And they're the size of SUVs.
Right. So is it ours? And we somehow or another have some stuff that the mainstream drone manufacturers at the highest level aren't aware of yet? Is it ours? Is it like some crazy military stuff? Because if it's not, and it's coming from the ocean, like, what do you mean it's coming? What the fuck do you...
50 of them.
What do you mean? What do you mean 50 suburban-sized
So check this out.
UFOs are coming out of the ocean?
This is really funny. I've been working with this guy. We've been communicating on the Signal for a long time. Actually, he was through Proton. He was emailing me stuff about Virginia, the UFO crash in Virginia. And but he was anonymous. One day, I was like, he's really knowledgeable. And he was sending me stuff that was really helpful. Like, you should track down this flight because if it happened, it was going out of this airport, go to this base. And I was like, finally one day, I was like, who are you? And how do you know what you know? He goes, I'm a retired United States Air Force colonel. I was like, oh. And he goes, and I'm also an experiencer. I had an experience back in 1980, blah, blah, blah.
Oh,
so
what happened to him?
He had a UFO encounter. It's in the movie towards the end. But anyway, he texted me yesterday, and he goes, James, I really want you to explain to me how the hell you orchestrated a UAP invasion right around the time your film's coming out. I was like, I'd really like to know how you did that. I was like, I know I couldn't.
Bro, do you know what kind of a budget you would have to have drones running in the sky all over? How many different cities are reporting it now? Like, what's the numbers?
It's exploding all over the place, and it's getting bigger. I've heard California. I've heard Europe now, bases in England, New York, New Jersey.
I've heard San Diego. I definitely... Wasn't there something in Ohio, right? Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. They had to shut that place down.
Yeah.
That's Ohio. So I've heard New Jersey. I think Florida, right? That was the one that Ryan Graves showed us a photo of. That was from Florida. So... Like, who fucking... what's going on? Who fucking knows?
I was super busy. I had the release of the film going on, and so I was like trying to focus on that and getting everything lined up, and it was a huge push. And all these text messages from all around the world are pouring in, like, what the hell's going on with these drones? And I was like, it's probably something conventional. I'm not going to worry about it right now. I'm just going to keep on focusing what I got at hand here. And then I started getting more information coming in, more information. Then a buddy of mine called me, and he actually went to Brazil with me a couple of years ago. And he's like, bro, I live here. I'm seeing these things in the sky. I've seen them 7 times now. They're the size of an SUV. And I was like, well, what do they look like? What do they behave like? He's like, well, they're making noise. I was like, oh, okay. Well, that quickly kind of eliminates, something non-conventional in terms of propulsion. But then I got reports of objects that didn't make any noise and that would go silent.
Say what kind of noise it was making?
Like a propellers drones would make, but loud, and they have a loiter, but they're big, and they have a loiter time of hours. The average drone, like I fly drones for my films, is like you're lucky to get 25 minutes. These things are there for hours.
Yeah, 5 hours at a time.
They go dark when they're approached by other objects. They're not getting picked up on FLIR at times. And then some of them have no noise. I've heard crescent-shaped. And then I heard about the ones that really got me because I contacted Christopher Mellon. I was like, Chris, what is going on, buddy? I really rely on him for good information. And he's like, I really don't know, man. It's a real shit show. And the U.S. government seems to be clueless right now. He goes, some of them are conventional. Some of them are misidentified conventional craft. But there are other ones coming in off the ocean that are up to 50. The Coast Guard and Police Department are reporting that truly remain a mystery. And then you had Schumer at a press conference just like it was yesterday. And then he's like, we don't know what they are. We don't know what they are. And the guy goes, yeah, so it's a UAP. He goes, well, they're drones. He goes, well, you wrote the legislation. It's a UAP. It's unidentified anomalous phenomena. Why don't you just use UAP? I think they're using the word drone because UAP is almost too scary, like some kind of invasions happening.
That's what UAP is, unidentified anomalous phenomenon?
Yeah.
So couldn't that be kind of anything? It doesn't even mean flying.
Well, that's the thing, because it used to be unidentified aerial. Well, it was UFO, unidentified flying object. Then it was UAP, unidentified aerial phenomenon. But then they're coming out of the water.
Yeah,
right?
I feel like this is nonsense.
So they said anomalous.
Why don't they just keep using UFO?
Because it has because people associate UFO with otherworldly, and they wanted to remove that baggage and make it a little less scary. That's my personal opinion.
I kind of get that, but also it's just an unidentified flying object. If we find out what it is, then it becomes an identified flying object. It doesn't necessarily mean it's alien.
True, but
right? Like think of the
people
stealth
probably
bombers.
jumping out of their windows right now if they said UFOs are invading the East Coast. You remember World of Worlds?
Right, that's
right?
true.
People were like jumping
That's
out
true.
of their
That's
windows.
a good point. That's actually a very good point.
So I think they toned it down. I think they're using the word drone, even though they're unidentified, just because of the fear factor. I think the fear factor is real.
Yeah. I can't help but cringe when I hear that word.
Oh, sorry. I didn't, the fear element.
It's so funny.
Sorry.
It was too much of a part of my life.
Too close to home.
So when did they start? Like, when was it acknowledged that this was an issue that was reoccurring recently? Like, obviously there's always been something in the sky. People have always seen things. Who knows what they are, whether or not they're, a lot of people see Starlink and they think it's UFOs, right?
Yeah, of course.
But when did this drone thing that we're currently experiencing basically every day, when did it start?
A couple weeks ago. Maybe
Just a few weeks ago?
Maybe a month ago. That's when I started really hearing about it. But
Jamie, is there like any sort of official answer to that?
I have something that
20th, 19th, something like that.
Is-
Mid-November.
Mid-November?
not an anonymous, but this is about incursions over. Listen to this. I promised this individual that I met at Seoul conference. He's a witness. He's a military guy. My name is Jeffrey Nusatelli. I served 16 years in the United States Air Force as a technical sergeant and a military police officer. In October 2003, my coworkers and I witnessed a series of extraordinary UAP incursions at Vandenberg Air Force Base in California. The initial event is known as the Vandenberg Red Square, and it was first mentioned during the historic UAP hearing held in 2023. The case involved Boeing contractors who witnessed a huge red square-shaped object, roughly the size of a football field, hovering over a missile defense system. The object was silent and had no visible means of propulsion. The contractors watched in amazement as the massive object slowly drifted east and vanished over the hills. I retained official Air Force records of the event, including the blotter form entry, which includes the names and contact information of all the witnesses, and provided it to select members of Congress, AARO, and the FBI. AARO is a new UAP task force, all-domain anomalous resolution office. After the initial event, several other UAP incursions took place at Vandenberg. I was on duty during many of the encounters, and I investigated the incidents as they unfolded. Now remember, this is not anonymous reporting here. They include a football field-sized craft that terrified security guards as it silently hovered over a launch facility before flying off at an unbelievable rate of speed. A brightly illuminated silent object that landed on the base flight line before accelerating instantaneously and disappearing into space. A huge triangular-shaped craft larger than a C-130 that hovered 50 feet over a police officer before it drifted slowly over the base. A blue-white liquid orb, roughly the size of his house, that hovered over his house on the base. The objects made no sound and had zero obvious means of propulsion. And he says, my experiences with UAP were awe-inspiring, exciting, and terrifying. I don't know why UAP are flying over our bases and our neighborhoods, but I do know the UAP phenomenon is of the utmost importance to all of humanity. I currently have 5 other military witnesses to the Vandenberg incursions that are all willing to testify tomorrow under oath that these statements are true. We need answers to this mystery and better government transparency. Thank you for the opportunity to share my story. Former United States Air Force Technical Sergeant and witness, Jeff Nusatelli.
Whoa.
Crazy, right? I mean, we're talking
That's
objects the size
bananas.
of a football field?
That's bananas. And then they take off insanely fast, just like the Tic Tac.
Straight up into space.
So this was it. What was the exact date of this?
This was 2003. There was a number of incursions during that year, up all the way into 2005. And he has the names, and they submitted it to the new head of AARO.
That's interesting because that coincides with the Tic Tac.